Scary telling.
I woke up to the smell of copper in the air. I had done it again. Another night of sleepwalking, another night of not knowing where I had gone or what I had done. But something was different this time. As I sat up in bed, I noticed a dark stain on my hands. Blood. Panic set in as I frantically searched my room for any signs of a wound or injury, but there were none. Shaking with fear, I stumbled out of bed and made my way to the bathroom. Turning on the light, I gasped in horror at the reflection staring back at me. My face was smeared with blood, my eyes wild with fear. And then I saw it. A symbol etched into my forehead, one that I had never seen before. I was terrified, but I knew I had to find out what had happened. I quickly got dressed and left my apartment, determined to retrace my steps from the night before. As I walked through the city, I felt as if I was being watched. The streets were eerily quiet, and the only sounds were my own footsteps echoing off the pavement. I eventually found myself in a secluded alleyway, a place I had never been before. It was then that I heard the whispers. Low, guttural sounds that seemed to be coming from every direction. And then I saw them. Figures in the shadows, watching me with glowing red eyes. I couldn't make out their faces, but I knew they were there for me. I turned to run, but it was too late. They were upon me, grabbing at my arms and dragging me deeper into the alley. I fought back with all my strength, but they were too strong. I was powerless against them. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was in a strange room. It was dimly lit, and the only sound was the drip of water from a leaky faucet. I tried to move, but found that I was bound to a chair. And then I saw him. The man who had brought me here. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to pierce into my very soul. He spoke to me then, in a language I couldn't understand. His voice was cold and cruel, and it sent shivers down my spine. He began to chant, and as he did, the room began to shake. The walls started to bleed, and the floor beneath me began to crack. I was trapped, and I knew there was no way out. I closed my eyes and braced myself for the worst. But then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The room was silent, and the man was gone. I was alone, but I knew I had to get out of there. I struggled against my bindings, trying to free myself from the chair. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, coming from somewhere deep within the room. It was a voice I recognized, but couldn't place. And then I saw her. It was my mother, or at least it looked like her. She was standing in the corner of the room, beckoning me to come closer. I knew it was a trap, but I couldn't resist. As I got closer, I saw that something was wrong. Her skin was pale and cold, and her eyes were black as coal. And then she spoke. "You must break the curse," she said, "or it will consume you too." I didn't understand, but I knew I had to do something. I struggled against my bindings once more, and this time they gave way. I ran from the room, knowing that I had to find a way to break the curse. For weeks, I searched for answers, looking for anyone who could help me. But every door was closed to me, and every path led to a dead end. And then one night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I heard the whispers again. But this time, they were different. They were a language I understood, and they were calling me to a specific location. Without thinking, I followed the whispers to an old abandoned church. It was dilapidated, with vines and weeds growing up the sides. But something about it drew me in. I stepped inside and immediately felt a sense of calm wash over me. And then I saw her. A woman in a white dress, with long black hair, was standing in the center of the church. She turned to me, and I saw that her eyes were the same glowing red as the figures from the alleyway. She spoke to me then, in the same language as the man from the room. But this time, I understood every word. She told me that I was cursed, and that the only way to break the curse was to sacrifice someone I loved. I was horrified, but I knew what I had to do. I had to break the curse. And so, I made my way back to my apartment, to the one person I loved more than anything in the world. My girlfriend. I lured her to the abandoned church, telling her that I had a surprise for her. And then, as she stepped inside, I plunged a knife into her chest. I watched as the life drained from her eyes, and I knew that I had done what I had to do. But the curse was not broken. The whispers continued, and the figures with glowing red eyes still haunted me. I knew then that there was no escape. The bloodthirsty curse would continue to consume me until I was nothing but a shell of who I once was. And so, I continued to walk the streets at night, searching for my next victim. The curse has taken over, and there is nothing left of the person I used to be. I am a monster, and the blood on my hands will never wash away. I was hiking alone in the dense woods when I noticed something strange. There were fresh cloven hoof prints on the ground, in sets of two, like someone or something had been running. I had heard stories of a creature known as the Devil's Pursuit that roamed these woods, and suddenly the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my stomach and continued on my hike. But as I walked further into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I turned around, there was no one there, but I could feel eyes on me. The sun began to set, casting an eerie orange glow over the woods. The trees loomed over me like giants, their branches creaking in the wind. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I picked up my pace, my heart racing as I tried to outrun whatever was following me. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling of being pursued. I was alone in the woods, with no one to turn to for help. As the night fell, the woods grew darker and more foreboding. The trees became twisted and gnarled, and the shadows seemed to come to life. That's when I saw a pair of glowing eyes, watching me from the darkness. I froze, too terrified to move. The eyes belonged to a creature with horns and hooves, like a demonic goat. It stepped out of the shadows, revealing its twisted, grotesque form. It was the Devil's Pursuit, and it had been following me all along. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the creature's hooves pounding on the ground behind me, getting closer and closer. I was no match for its speed, and I knew that I was going to be caught. But then, something strange happened. The creature slowed down, as if toying with me. It wanted me to think that I had a chance, that I could escape. And just when I thought that I might make it out alive, it pounced. Its claws dug into my back, tearing through my flesh. I screamed in pain, but it was no use. The creature had me in its grasp, and I was powerless to stop it. I thought that I was going to die, that my life was over. But then, something strange happened. The creature began to change, its twisted form morphing into that of a man. It looked at me with cold, dead eyes, and I knew that I was face to face with the devil himself. He spoke to me in a voice that was both soothing and terrifying, promising me power and wealth beyond my wildest dreams. All I had to do was give in to him, to sell my soul to the devil. I knew that I had a choice to make. I could either give in to the devil's temptation, or I could fight back, even if it meant sacrificing everything. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and summoned every ounce of courage I had left. I screamed at the devil, telling him that I would never give in to him, that I would rather die than sell my soul. The devil laughed, his eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. But then, something strange happened. He disappeared into a puff of smoke, leaving me alone in the woods. I limped my way back to civilization, my body battered and bruised. But I knew that I had won the battle, that I had faced my fears and stood up to the devil himself. I had escaped his pursuit and lived to tell the tale. But even as I sit here, safe and sound, I can still feel the weight of his temptation lingering in my mind. The promise of power and wealth still lingers, tempting me to give in to his offer. I know that the devil will always be out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. But I also know that I have the strength to resist him, to stand up to him and fight back. And so, I will continue to walk through the woods, knowing that the devil's pursuit is always there, waiting for its next prey. But I will also know that I am not alone, that I have the power to resist his temptation and live to tell the tale. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, demons, and all that mumbo-jumbo seemed like pure fiction to me. That is, until I saw her. It was just an ordinary day, and I was walking home from work when I saw her. My own reflection, but dressed in different clothes. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, I realized that it was something far more sinister. The other me was staring back at me with an intense gaze, as if she was trying to communicate something to me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that her eyes were different from mine, darker and more ominous. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I was frozen in place, unable to move or scream. That's when I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like a knife was piercing my heart. As I fell to the ground, the other me rushed to my side, cradling my head in her lap. She whispered something to me, but I couldn't make out the words. My vision started to blur, and I felt myself slipping away. In my last moments, I realized that the other me was not a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. She was a doppelganger, a malevolent entity that had taken on my form in order to steal my soul. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The doctors told me that I had suffered a heart attack and that I was lucky to be alive. But I knew the truth. The other me had tried to take my life, and she would not stop until she succeeded. For months, I lived in fear, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if the other me was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I stopped going outside, stopped seeing my friends, stopped living my life. And then, one day, she came back. I was sitting alone in my apartment when I saw her again, staring back at me from the other side of the room. This time, I was ready. I had done my research, read every book and article I could find about doppelgangers and how to defeat them. I lit a candle, recited a protection spell, and waited for her to make her move. She approached me slowly, her eyes glowing with malice. But this time, I was not afraid. I stood my ground, staring her down with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. As she lunged at me, I held up a mirror, reflecting her own image back at her. And in that moment, she vanished, dissipating into nothingness. I never saw the doppelganger again, but the experience changed me forever. I learned that sometimes, the things we don't believe in can be the most terrifying of all. and that sometimes the only way to conquer our fears is to face them head on. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. I've read countless books, watched hours of documentaries, and visited numerous haunted locations in search of proof that there is more to this world than meets the eye. So, when I saw an ad online for a haunted doll, I couldn't resist. The seller claimed that the doll was possessed by the spirit of a young girl who had died tragically in a house fire. As soon as the doll arrived in the mail, strange things started happening. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and I would hear the sound of a little girl laughing in the dead of night. At first, I was excited. This was the proof I had been searching for, the evidence that ghosts were real. But as the days went by, the activity intensified. I started to feel like I was being watched, like something was lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. And then, one night, I woke up to find the doll gone. I searched every room, but she was nowhere to be found. I was terrified, imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios in my head. Days turned into weeks, and I became more and more paranoid. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, made my heart race with fear. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at my bedroom door. I froze, afraid to move. But the scratching continued, getting louder and more insistent. With shaking hands, I slowly got out of bed and made my way to the door. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, bracing myself for what might be on the other side. But there was nothing there. No doll, no ghostly figure, nothing but the empty darkness of the hallway. I was on edge for the rest of the night, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Days turned into weeks, and I became more and more desperate to find the doll. I searched every nook and cranny of my apartment, but she was nowhere to be found. And then, one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a small box, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. With trembling hands, I opened the box, and there she was. The haunted doll, staring up at me with her lifeless eyes. I screamed and dropped the box, but the doll didn't move. She just lay there, as if waiting for me to pick her up. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake. That the doll was not a mere curiosity, but a malevolent entity, bent on driving me to the brink of madness. I tried to get rid of the doll, to throw her away or burn her, but she always found her way back to me. In the end, I was forced to accept that she was a part of me now, a cursed object that would haunt me until the end of my days. I learned the hard way that some things are better left alone, that curiosity can be a dangerous thing. And that, sometimes, the things we think we want are the things that will destroy us in the end. I had just settled down to watch a movie when I heard the frantic pounding on my door. At first, I thought it was just some kids playing a prank, but the urgency in the pounding told me otherwise. I hesitated for a moment, but my neighbor's screams urged me to take action. I opened the door and was met with a horrific sight. Standing on my doorstep was my neighbor, or at least, what appeared to be my neighbor. His skin was stretched unnaturally across his body, and his eyes were dark and lifeless. I stumbled backward in shock as the creature that wore my neighbor's skin lunged at me, its mouth agape and filled with razor-sharp teeth. I stumbled back and fell to the floor as the creature clawed at me, trying to rip me apart. I scrambled back, trying to get away, but it was too fast, too strong. As I cowered on the floor, I watched in horror as the creature ripped off its own skin, revealing a twisted, humanoid figure underneath. It was a skinwalker. I had always heard stories about these creatures, but I had never believed in them. They were supposed to be shapeshifters, able to take on the form of any animal or person they chose. But this was no animal. This was something far more sinister. As the skinwalker advanced on me, I realized that I was trapped. My neighbor's skin lay in tatters on the floor, and I had nowhere to run. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end to come. But it never did. I opened my eyes to find myself alone in my living room. There was no sign of the skinwalker or my neighbor. I stumbled to my feet, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare? But then I saw the scratches on my arm, the bite marks on my shoulder. They were all too real. For days, I tried to convince myself that it had all been my imagination. That there was no such thing as skinwalkers, that it was all just a myth. But the scratches and bite marks refused to heal, and I knew deep down that I had encountered something truly terrifying. I never saw my neighbor again after that night. In fact, no one in the neighborhood ever mentioned him again. It was as though he had never existed in the first place. But I knew the truth. I had seen the skinwalker, and I knew that it was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And I knew that I was never truly safe, not as long as it was out there, watching and waiting. The memory of that night still haunts me to this day. I may never know why the skinwalker chose to attack me, but I know one thing for sure: I will never be the same again.